John Lennon probably summed it up best when he said if you try to give rock and roll another name, you might as well call it Chuck Berry.
Riding along in my automobile, my baby beside me at the wheel. I stole a kiss at the turn of a mile, my curiosity running wild, my heart beating rhythm and my soul keep singing the blues. I roll over Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky the news. Since my baby party come on, I can't get started, come on. I came for to check it, I wish somebody'd come along and run into it and wreck it. Every time you go, 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 Johnny, go, 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 Johnny, go, go.
Just a few of the recordings with which Chuck Berry helped kickstart rock and roll in the mid-50s, setting the template for successive generations with attitude, energy and skill, both on stage and in the studio. Chuck Berry has rightfully been hailed as the original poet laureate of rock and roll, creating Friday night teenage vignettes about cars, girls and music. He's died at the age of 90, having just completed a new album which now looks set to become a best-selling posthumous release 62 years after his debut single Maybelline. To discuss the massive legacy of Chuck Berry, I'm joined in the studio by music writer Kevin Le Gendre. On the line from New York by musician and rock critic Kandia Crazy Horse, editor of Rip It Up, The Black Experience in Rock and Roll. But first, here's Sheffield singer-songwriter and 50s rock and roll fanatic Richard Hawley.
The thing that gets you with Chuck Berry and rock and roll in general is basically it comes up through your feet. It's the groove and the beat, I think. And I don't think it was ever intended to kind of attack you in a sort of cerebral manner. And I think that's the remarkable thing about Chuck Berry, is that the point of rock and roll was it was all about the beat, you know. But with his music, there was a lot more width, depth, height, you know, a lot more dimension to it than a lot of other artists. And rightly so, a lot of it was below the waist, where it was kind of trying to get you, you know. And with his stuff, there was kind of stuff above the neck as well. And his lyrics were just phenomenal, I think. He was Shakespearean sometimes in his scope. You listen to songs like Memphis, Tennessee, which is a heart-wrenching song.
Help me information, more than that I cannot add. Only that I miss her and all the fun we had. But we were pulled apart because her mom did not agree and tore apart our happy home in Memphis, Tennessee.
And he was extremely playful with words. I think his use of the English language in song was like no one else before him, you know, and probably after too, you know.
And what was interesting was that he was writing his own songs. I mean, that was breaking the mould back in the mid-50s, wasn't it? He was the beginning of the singer-songwriter.
Yeah, I mean, he was the whole package because he was a great songwriter, a phenomenal guitar player. And I always loved his singing voice as well, really expressive way of singing. He had the duck walk, the moves, the whole thing. And respectfully, he said, you know, he modelled a lot of what he did on T-Bone Walker and was greatly influenced as well by country music, which was unique, really, for black American artists to kind of openly admit that.
And he was taking those country blues riffs then and using those thirds and those fourths, the progressions, and then just speeding it up, really, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you listen to Maybelline with that opening, you know, the bung ding dong ding 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 dong.
Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true?
I mean, that's a country music coda that was taken from an old Bob Wills song called Ida Red that he kind of rewrote, which was a common thing with three-chord sort of country, blues, rock and roll. It was all a big melting pot, you know. But if you listen to the opening of Maybelline, he was doing exactly the same thing at the same time, pretty much, as Elvis was doing with That's All Right Mama, the opening, the dang jing, ding jing, it's the same thing, you know.
And I guess he was also describing the lives of his audience back to them, which was, again, another breakthrough. We take it for granted these days that that's what pop music does.
Yeah, I think for anybody to come up with the concept of writing your own song as an artist at that period of time, and, you know, even to this day, you still have artists that are, you know, massively manipulated and marketed, and they don't have any control in what they do. But for a black American man, an artist, to be writing his own music and being in control of his own destiny was unheard of. You know, he was really a massive pioneer. But it did shine a light on, in a way, ordinariness, like the fact that he could choose a subject like a car and turn it into this thing of wonder and fascination. That I think he was the master of that, and he would have poignancy and humour, whiplash sharp lyrics. He was up there with writers like Bob Dylan, without a doubt.
A very earthy artist, but also an intergalactic one as well.
Well, yeah, of course, because Johnny B. Good is on a spaceship that has been travelling since 1986 into the outer reaches of the universe, and his music literally will last billions of years.
Richard Hawley, on one of his rock and roll heroes, Chuck Berry. Kevin Le Gendre is in the studio with me, and Kandia Crazy Horse is on the line from New York. Kandia, as Richard Hawley was saying there, he was the real deal. He was the original rock and roll package, wasn't he? And a reminder of the African-American roots of this kind of music.
Yes, good afternoon to my sisters and brothers in Albion that are putting black in the Union Jack. What I certainly can appreciate that as a Native American of African and Scottish descent from the South, I'm Southern on both sides. I come from a world of black vernacular culture where Chuck Berry was the sun and the moon is Little Richard, and that's a world that's been lost in the new post-racial America. So it's good for us to remember that. Because Chuck Berry walked on at age 90, it's kind of hard to remember, but in the 50s, in the middle of the 20th century, he really was the auteur of teenage-dom. And for that to be a black man at the height of Jim Crow laws, and in an era when Emmett Till was murdered for supposedly whistling at a white woman in Mississippi, that is a very radical thing that I don't think we can appreciate enough today.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a real sense of urgency when you listen to those records. They still ring true. When you listen to a song like Brown-Eyed Handsome Man, you get a sense of the life being lived by him and by his contemporaries there at the time.
Yes, he wrote Brown-Eyed Handsome Man after traveling a deal in California amongst African American and Latino, or Chicano to be precise, cultures. He actually witnessed an event where a Chicano man was being persecuted by the police, and it was his woman who was trying to keep the police from taking him in, and that's the source behind the song Brown-Eyed Handsome Man. So I've always looked to that one as a place where he was definitely commenting on the racial nature of America in that time, through slyly, but I mean, the brown-eyed handsome man can easily be a brown-skinned handsome man who was Chuck himself, a master of the guitar and of showmanship and vocalizing.
Well, let's just talk about the musicianship here with Kevin Le Gendre, who's in the studio with me. And Kevin, that word influential is often overused. With Chuck Berry, it's absolutely essential, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't have rock without him. And the science of the riff, the ability to come up with a figure which will basically stick in your ear, which will encourage other musicians to play off as well, to actually create communication within a rhythm section. If you think of the intros in particular, what he does with those short figures, those riffs basically, that's him to a T. And I think the really clever thing is, apart from the country blues that Richard was talking about, you've also got swing and jazz in there as well. I think there's the influence of Louis Jordan. If you think of how important he was in rhythm and blues, as this master of short, pithy pieces where you have these riffs on the saxophone, I think Chuck is almost replacing the saxophone with the guitar.
Yeah, and those riffs were soaked up by the youngsters around the world, particularly here in London, by the young Keith Richards and Mick Jagger and John Lennon as well. I mean, Chuck Berry actually there was some long-standing bitterness about that in a way, wasn't it? Not particularly about those people, but about the way his music had been appropriated and then, monetized down the decades.
Well, that starts with Maybelline, that, Alan Freed, the DJ, had a writing credit that he had to fight for many years to be able to have sole ownership of the song back. And, I mean, because of the racial climate in America and throughout the West at the time in mid-20th century, there were limits to his ability to dominate the field in the way that he did. There was certainly, a case where contemporaries like Elvis Presley were promoted over him or had more possibilities in the entertainment field that were just simply denied to him as a black man. He pushed up against those limitations.
Kevin.
I think he gets his revenge in lyrics, though, because if you think about Roll Over Beethoven, what he's saying is the European classical music establishment better watch out, because there's something that we've got, African Americans, it's called rock and roll, it's called rhythm and blues, it's a new beat. Roll over Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky the news. We have something which will take over the world. And when you think about what happened in popular music after that, so Martha Reeves and the Vandellas saying, calling out around the world, are you ready for a brand new beat? Bob Marley saying, reggae is a new bag, don't be a drag, listen to that. It's exactly the same thing. It's coming out of Chuck saying, I have something which I want the world to hear, and I have something that's relevant to the world. And he also correctly identifies the means through which that will happen, which is the jukebox and the DJ. He's writing a letter to the DJ saying, this is it, this is the record that you need to play if you want to be hip. So he's correctly recognised the channels of distribution in a changing world through which this music will be conveyed to people.
Yeah, and if there is one, I mean, it's impossible to say, is there one record? There are so many, and there is that one which is heading out into space at the moment. But if you were going to, if you're telling people to listen to one Chuck Berry record to understand it, which would it be?
I'd say Johnny Be Good for the intellect and the invention with words, again, which Richard was talking about. Think about what he does. He takes the B from the command, Johnny Be Good, and he turns it into the letter B, and then he takes the E and he puts it on the good at the end.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Kandia Crazy Horse in New York, Kevin Le Gendre here in the studio remembering the great Chuck Berry, who has died aged 90.